Good evening, and thank you for attending our ASP Fall Speaker Series. We hope you've enjoyed tonight's presentations thus far. For our final presentation, I'd like to introduce Analisa Roche. Analisa is an ASP member from Texas who's currently running as an ASP write-in candidate for U.S. Senate. Please enjoy her keynote speech, reaffirming our commitment to human justice, dignity, and peace. Welcome, Analisa.
Thank you. I think that we have a delay. Bill, will you chat me if the delay is problematic? I'm going to go ahead and start otherwise. Hi, everyone. It's so good to be here. And thank you for coming tonight. We're going to talk tonight about the ASP's commitment to human dignity, justice, and peace. And we're going to start with my gratitude for y'all coming tonight and for your membership in and support of the ASP in general, and your support of the mission, which is so important to all of us. And we're going to talk a lot more about that tonight. I wanted to tell you briefly how I got involved with the ASP, because I'm so grateful it happened this way, and as a matter of encouragement for you to try the same thing. I was involved in a Catholic homeschool organization where almost every single member was extremely conservative politically. And I never felt like I quite fit in politically, particularly when there would be discussion of the death penalty. And I was just lamenting my out of placeness to a friend in the organization who I knew was more like-minded. And I said, if only there were a political party that was pro-life in all the ways. And she kind of lights up and says, there is. And this was probably 2018 when we were still pretty small. And she told me about the ASP. And I looked into it that afternoon, and I really haven't looked back since. My involvement has just gotten more and more over the years as I've learned more and just become more committed to the mission and the values that the organization holds. Culminating, well, hopefully not ending, in my run for Senate in Texas, which will happily be over in just a few days. And I may or may not win, so we'll see where God puts me next. But that's, I think, definitely the largest involvement I've had yet. At first, I went through the whole, am I throwing my vote away if I vote third party? And I have family members who believe strongly that that is throwing your vote away. And I kind of gradually came to the understanding that I've been thinking voting for the lesser of two evils for most of my life. And there was no reason to suspect that was going to change. And so if I wanted something to be different, I had to make a different choice. And that different choice was no longer choosing the lesser of two evils and being willing to risk voting third party. And I've voted ASP for every candidate I can since then. The change has to start somewhere, and every election feels like the most important election ever. So I can't reasonably expect for the next one or the one after that to be any different until I start making different choices and encourage other people to do the same. So that's my encouragement to you, to just talk about the party with other people who might be interested. I know a lot of you are already doing that, and I'm so grateful for that because I was so happy to hear about its existence when I didn't know. Let's talk about why this moment in particular matters. You may have heard we're growing really fast around here. In the 2016 presidential election, Mike Matern received about 6,700 votes. And in the 2020 election, Brian Carroll got over 42,000 nationwide. So that's a six-fold increase. And we fully expect for Peter Sonski and Lauren Onak to get even more this time. Between 2016 and 2020 as well, the membership in the party doubled. And certainly you have probably experienced anecdotally our increasing coverage in the media and the way that organizations, both Catholic and not, are paying more attention to us, publishing about us, interviewing us, etc. So we want to capitalize on the fact that our membership is growing and our influence is growing. It's particularly important for us to grab this opportunity because of the many challenges facing our country today. As you well know, we are more and more polarized in our country. More and more people are facing economic hardship. Income disparities keep growing. Environmental concerns keep growing. And abortion sentiments in the wake of the Dobbs decision almost seem to be galvanized to overturn Dobbs and reinstate Roe. I participated in a candidate forum last week in Dallas, and there were 10 of us who were just local for all levels of office, answering questions from the audience, and they submitted them ahead of time. And one of them was, do you support the right to an abortion? And I was the only person at that entire table who said no to that. Additionally, the feeling in the room went from, I talked about climate justice, I talked about income disparities, and the whole room was with me. The feeling in the room was good after every question I answered until this one. And I felt like I had completely lost the audience after I answered that question. And I'm in Texas, where we have a 6-week abortion ban. And I really have a sense in the conversation that Texans are really trying to mobilize to overturn the 6-week abortion ban. You know as well that most abortions now happen medically or with the abortion pill combination, and those don't rely on state lines, regardless of whether the law says they should or not. And so it becomes harder and harder to reach abortion-minded moms, or moms who, as we know, are often feeling coerced into getting an abortion. And so I think that a party that is pro-life across all lines just becomes more and more needed. I think our consistency in our pro-life ethic is an essential part of our message that our society really needs. We're going to talk a little bit more about that with our commitment to human dignity. The way that the American Solidarity Party values life from conception through natural death, advocates against abortion and against the death penalty, advocates against euthanasia, is a powerful idea. The way that we are consistent in every facet of being pro-life really adds power to our message. In addition to our concerns to protect actual literal life, we also want to improve the quality of life for all kinds of marginalized groups. We advocate for the poor. We, in fact, give a, quote, preferential option to the poor in the way that the church has called us to. We advocate for rights for disabled individuals, for the elderly, for the unborn. And we want to uphold their dignity and address their needs across all of our policy decisions. And it's so, so needed today. It's so easy to forget that every individual we interact with is a human being. They're not a statistic, and they're not the other side, and they're not on the other side of the world. They're not illegal aliens. They are human beings who are facing crises more than we are sometimes, and who need to be supported and advocated for by those of us who have power, who have a voice, who have platforms and stages to advocate for them on. One of the statistics I find interesting that kind of magnifies the intersectionality of various groups that are marginalized is that about 26% of disabled adults in the United States are living in poverty. And so when we advocate for rights for the disabled, universal design, ways that make spaces not only accommodating but welcoming to people with various disabilities, we are in effect advocating for their entire qualities of life, for their standard of living on the whole. And I think that, again, our consistent pro-life message magnifies that ability, that every way we advocate for the dignity of a human being advocates for them in many different areas, and not just the particular area that we're focused on in the moment or in a particular organization. It's an interesting statistic from this book called The Science of Dignity, in which the authors determined with their studies that dignity threats affected more than 1/5 of Americans in 2021. And that was more than a 50% increase from 2017. And we'll talk more about this in a minute, but I think that our country is dehumanizing people more and more and more, much of it unintentionally. But in a way, we have to be intentional about humanizing people in order to prevent ourselves from going the other way. And I think that our party does a really good job of that, and it helps us as individuals have more of a humanizing attitude towards everyone. Let's talk about some current challenges to human dignity. I mentioned income inequality, not just income, economic inequality. And this is a pretty little graph that shows you, this is the share of income earned by the top 1% in various countries from 1975 to 2015. And the United States is this top blue line. And what it shows you in kind of a quick and simplistic way is that the proportion of all income in the United States earned by the richest people keeps going up and up and up and up. And so it's just one simplistic indicator of how income disparities are just continuing to rise at faster and faster rates. And it's happening everywhere, but you can see from this graph that the United States is kind of winning the race in a way that we wouldn't really want it to. As well, healthcare disparities seem to be growing in spite of the Affordable Care Act, in spite of various efforts and movements to reform healthcare and the way it's provided in this country. And just anecdotally, the way that healthcare is tied to employers often tends to be rather unfair. And I'm going to acknowledge my privilege before I tell you the way it's unfair to my family, in that we can still afford the healthcare we need, which many people can't. However, our healthcare plan is much worse, more expensive, fewer benefits, harder to get coverage for things than many of my peers. And that is because my husband works for an 8-person company. And so they don't qualify for the fancy plans with better coverage and lower co-insurance and lower co-payments and lower prescription prices. You know the drill. I have often told people that with 2 chronically ill children, advocating for my children's health care has been my part-time job for the last 20 years. And I think all the time about people who aren't stay-at-home parents with the ability to devote the time and the energy, as well as the persistence that I have and the knowledge I have and the experience I have with the healthcare system. Too many people just pay the bill when the bill is wrong or the bill is too high, or they could have gotten coverage if they had pushed a little harder, but they don't have the time or the know-how to navigate the giant system that dehumanizes every one of us. And so I want to use my experience and my privilege to help advocate for healthcare for people who don't have the privileges that I have. And the ASP has the same attitude towards healthcare. Let's make it more equitable. Let's humanize and uphold the dignity of people who need healthcare and can't afford it or can't get any kind of coverage. So we do advocate often for universal healthcare access. We also advocate for fair wages, the economic system of distributism that you heard about earlier tonight helps advocate for more equitable distributions of all kinds of helps that the government provides, including policies supporting economic opportunity and social mobility. And if you haven't read John Madai's book, I just blanked on it. John Madai's book on distributism, I really recommend it. It's helped me understand a lot more about this economic philosophy, why it works, and how much better it is than the alternatives. Our advocacy for distributism goes right alongside our advocacy for social justice and the common good, because we have solidarity as our guiding principle. It's right there in the name. I love that reminder every time I describe our party, that that's really what we're about. I think of solidarity as interdependence, and I draw a lot of my knowledge of that from our board member, Leah Labresco-Sargent's Substack called Other Feminisms, which I highly recommend if you haven't read it. Leah's whole philosophy is that we depend on each other and that there is dignity in that. It's not a shame to need help from someone else. I keep telling my mom, it's okay if I have to take care of you when you're older. I don't want you to think of yourself ever as a burden. And my mom, who I would think, being a devout Catholic, would have this understanding of solidarity, is so concerned about not being a burden on her children. And I just wish that no one in our country had to think that way. I wish that we could all remember that we all depend on each other at various times, whether we are elderly, whether we are sick, whether we are postpartum, whether we've had surgery. Everybody needs help sometimes. And that's a good thing. That's not a burden. That teaches all of us about relationships, about how to take care of someone well, and that everyone who needs help is a fellow human being and has just as much dignity in their dependence as they did in their more independent times. Another organization that is also part of our board, as you all probably know, is the group called Strong Towns. And my favorite thing about Strong Towns is the way they advocate for walkable cities, which foster community. I was listening to a podcast on NPR several years ago, and they were talking about artists and various creatives who found it helpful to live in some sort of community situation. Generally, they were talking about apartments, and that so much of their creativity was fueled by their chance encounters with people in the hallway and on the elevator. And it seems to me that we're just minimizing those opportunities in our current time in so many different ways. We are ordering food to our homes more than ever, but most of the time we never see the person delivering the food because the apps default to a leave at my door and notify me on my phone. And so one of the ways I have attempted to be more intentional about solidarity is by unchecking that box and having face-to-face encounters with the people who bring dinner for the family. And then I try to have that attitude day to day in many of my encounters. I have a tendency to try to avoid face-to-face encounters because it's just easier. But it's not what's good for our community. It's not what's good for our souls. And it's not what's good for solidarity, for teaching us to depend on each other and to be not just okay with that, but welcoming of that interdependence. As you probably know, some other ways that the ASP advocates for this outside of its board membership and their organizations is our advocacy for workers' rights, for fair wages, for family support, such as family leave, such as the child tax credit, for all kinds of policies that make it easier and more financially accessible for young families, ideally, if possible, to live on one income, if that's what they would rather do. Another thing that we have solidarity with is the environment. It seems to me we almost think of the environment as another relationship that we have in solidarity with each other. We believe in our moral duty to protect the environment. We believe in sustainable, ecologically responsible policies. I am a particular fan of our advocacy for climate justice. Here in Fort Worth, we have a particular community that's lower income, but very close-knit. Families have lived there for generations. Their entire neighborhood is surrounded by industry. And so the air they breathe is so much less clean than the air of someone living on the river or the golf course nearby or the lake that the golf course is on. And while some disparities in living environments are natural, it's not okay that another polluting industry wants to go move in next to this particular neighborhood because it's cheaper and because maybe they think that there won't be as many complaints about it there. And it's just so unjust to people who have less money and fewer resources. So our moral duty to protect the environment extends to less privileged individuals who are affected more disproportionately by pollution. As well, we advocate for sustainable policies of all kinds, such as reducing carbon emissions, promoting renewable energy, ensuring that resources are conserved for the future. My children are all ages 18 to 22, and climate change is the number one thing that they and their peers discuss as something that scares them about the future. And a future with the American Solidarity Party prioritizes our efforts to make everything cleaner, the air and the water and the ground, and to make sure that our environment lasts us for many generations to come. One of the things that particularly concerns me that I see the ASP as helping prevent is that human activity has led to an estimated 1 million species being at risk of extinction due to environmental degradation, deforestation, and climate change. Our biodiversity is dropping and dropping. As many as 82 species per day, according to some studies, are going extinct, never to exist again. And the lost potential in that, the interdependence of our environment naturally that we're losing every time another species goes extinct is so important to remember and to keep at the forefront of our policy decisions. Finally, we also advocate for global peace and for subsidiarity. In terms of global peace, we advocate for diplomacy over aggression. And again, I think that comes from our insistence on solidarity. People who live in other countries are human beings with as much dignity as we have here in America. And we almost don't hear about the wars in Africa, the civil wars, the genocides. We hear about Israel and Palestine, and we hear about Russia and Ukraine, and we should. But it seems to me that we should also be hearing about the war in Rwanda, the genocide in Rwanda, and the civil wars in other African countries that are just not as present in the news. So we have solidarity with all people who are victims of war. But I think that advocate for lots of people who are suffering from war and not just several countries that we identify more with. The subsidiarity principle suggests that government is best done locally. So we advocate for the smallest possible, lowest possible level of government to handle an issue that effectively can do so. So while the federal government certainly has a role in things that affect the entire country, particularly across state lines, it probably makes more sense for the Department of Education to be something that's done at a state level and or a city level. There are many things that the federal government handles that would be better handled in a more local way. And so we advocate as the ASP for empowering local communities. We work with strong towns and other organizations that help strengthen local government. We encourage people to run for local office. We think about issues that could be best handled in a smaller way than they are handled now. We want something more decentralized and, most importantly, people-centered. I think it's so much easier to humanize people over the issues when those people are your neighbors and not privileged people in Washington, D.C. that you've never met and never will. So as much as possible, we like to see local government where people interact face-to-face with people they live near and have vested interest in strong relationships with. So this is your call to action. I encourage you to engage in various local initiatives. Look into your local strong towns. Do what I did and volunteer at your county hospital holding babies. It's remarkable to me that that's something I get to volunteer doing, and I get so much more out of it than probably the babies do. But I've been exposed to such an entirely different population than I normally would be by volunteering at the county hospital. And I've learned about the incredible medicine that's being provided there. I think it's the best hospital in North Texas. And I didn't know that before I volunteered there. I'm just continually amazed at the services they offer and the way people are humanized in a face-to-face way at our county hospital. I also can recommend another organization I volunteer with called Braver Angels. I know the ASP has worked with them before. Braver Angels basically teaches people how to have polarized conversations in a non-polarizing way. They hold debates with strict rules where you just get to listen to people you disagree with, and everybody comes away better educated and usually not very angry. And it's just a life-changing experience to see all of this happening in such a civil way, so contrary to what we see in the media all the time. And then finally, I encourage you to be an active voice for the ASP's principles. I think you're probably already doing that, but I'm here to tell you that the rest of us are out there doing that too. And even though we have to meet on our computers instead of face-to-face today, and in some of our other ways, some of the other things we do, we're all out there doing this work, and I thank you for that. So in summary, I envision a future where the American Solidarity Party is the biggest political influence in our society. This is a vision where our values influence the broader political landscape and foster a more just, peaceful, and compassionate society. And again, I thank you for your commitment and involvement. And I share with you Martin Luther King's thoughts. In the end, we will remember not the words of our enemies, but the silence of our friends. And I encourage you to not be the silent friend, but to be the voice for the underprivileged through the American Solidarity Party. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Analisa, for being the voice of the American Solidarity Party tonight, and for joining us, and for your hard work and dedication to the ASP, and for offering yourself as a candidate. We all truly appreciate you. And thank you to everyone who came tonight and learned a little bit more about the ASP. We hope you're able to join us tomorrow, beginning at 4 o'clock in the afternoon Eastern Time. We'll have presentations on distributism. We'll have a presentation on strong towns, a presentation on Christian democracy, and finally, a keynote from another powerful ASP woman, Lauren Onak, our ASP vice presidential candidate. So should be a good day again tomorrow. Thank you again, Analisa, and good night, everybody.
Good night.